Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkl SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this special transition episode, we will be chatting to Gary Aubin all about transitions, whether it be from one class to another, one year group to another, or from primary school to secondary school, and in particular how parents and teachers can support children with these moves. Hi Gary, it's a pleasure to have you back with us today. Could you start by briefly introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. Lovely to be on the pod again. My name's Gary Aubin. I'm a former teacher in Senko and SEND leader across the Multi-Academy Trust. And now I work with whole education, supporting schools and trusts in relation to SEND, do bits of work with DEFE, with the EEF, with various things, essentially trying to bang the drum to support as many colleagues as possible to do good work within SEND. I also wrote The Lone Senko and have just written a book called The Parent's Guide to SEND. I feel passionately about, the ability of the sector to really support parents with what is often a great challenge, supporting their children and making the wonderful best decisions they can for their children with SEND, which is often really hard.
Fabulous, thank you. So transitions are on the minds of many teachers, parents and children across the country right now, whether it be the big step from primary to secondary school or moving to a new year group or a different teacher. For lots of children, these can be a big step in themselves, can't they? So for children with SEND, we know often transitions sometimes require a bit of additional support. Can you give some top tips for teachers, particularly those with year 6 children with potentially SEND, as they prepare them for moving up to secondary school?
Yeah, so the first thing is a very sort of probably slightly fluffy answer to start with before I get a bit more specific. The fluffy answer is children with SEND have legal rights that are just as true in secondary as they are in primary. So where primary colleagues may very well be concerned about what's going to happen in secondary, actually, those legal rights remain. Having worked as a secondary Senko and in and with many, many secondary schools, that same desire for children with SEND to thrive is typically exactly what happens in secondary in the way it is in primary. And of course, that looks different. Of course, the provision is different. Of course, it's a bit of a feels like a bit of a leap of faith all around. But my only experience is of wonderful, hardworking, committed practitioners wanting the absolute best for children and young people with SEND once they start secondary. So that's the kind of broader, perhaps fluffy answer. There's a couple of things I'd then say from there. One is around the importance of language. It's very easy to focus on the unknown, to focus on things that are, well, it's going to be a big change next year. And we throw away these comments sometimes, don't we? And we all try to, but I've certainly done it myself, where actually a small comment about how, well, you won't have this support next year, which is said almost, at the end of a long day when we're just kind of accidentally sharing an anxiety of our own, perhaps, for the child. We've just got to be really careful about those things, of course. And the next thing I say is about we need to help children, young people see themselves in whatever that transition is likely to be in as concrete a way as possible for most children. So, the obvious thing is there, all right, well, has the child got some visits lined up? And if the child has SEND, that might mean some additional visits, a more enhanced transition program. But it also doesn't have to mean that. It will also be things that where we're not trying to scare children, we're not trying to say, well, next year no one's going to scribe for you or anything like that. But we're trying to help pupils to get as concrete sense as possible of what it will look like for them. So these are some of the things that children learn in year 7 when they're doing maths. Or I know that the secondary school that you're going to has a lunch club where they typically like to do this. Again, what are those things that feel important to the child or young person about either the supports they get at primary or in their current class or in Key Stage 1 or whatever that transition is? And will it be the same? And where it's different, how can we still give a reassuring message in a way that feels as concrete as possible to that child, and by extension, of course, to their family.
Wonderful. And I think in a sense you've answered as well what some of the tips would be the same for moving the smaller transitions, moving from one year group to another, I suppose. In terms of parents then, because we have parents who are watching this as well and listening, how can they work with their child's school to ensure the transition process is well planned and thoughtful? How can they be part of it? Because especially, the year 6 to year 7, lots of parents, especially parents with children with SEND, might be thinking, how can I make sure that everything goes smoothly? How can I really support the child through this and the school through this?
Yeah, so in the Parents' Guide to SEND, we have, which I co-wrote with my best mate, who is a parent of a child with SEND, who's got any HCPs in a special school. We try and bring that collective view together of professional and personal. And what we came to together was a series of questions that we think parents are within their right and entitled and should be asking schools about things like transition and much else as well. So I think so parents know their child best, no doubt of that. I think often within education, or too often within education, parents are expected, though, to have the answers about what the best educational decision is for their child. And that surely is that sort of collaborative where the teachers, leaders in schools actually should have a really good input as to what those good educational decisions are, rather than needing parents to have all the answers, even though they know the child best. So when it comes to transitions, I think parents shouldn't have to know the answers. They should know what the questions are. And so, again, they're in the book, but we think some of those questions for the school that a child might be leaving are things like, how are you supporting my child through that transition process? What information are you transferring to the new school to help them know the child as well as they can? And maybe, especially primary, secondary, how are you increasing my child's independence over time to ready them for what might be different in secondary, even though there may well be lots and lots of support available? And likewise, parents to ask the school, and it's hard, isn't it? Because many parents may well never have been to that secondary school yet, certainly not have those relationships with staff, but actually for parents to be able to say to secondary staff, what supports are you planning to give my child? What information have you received there? How are you supporting my child to learn about your school before they get here to support that successful transition? So I think those are examples of where knowing the right questions to ask is really helpful. Knowing what all the answers are to those questions shouldn't be the thing. Parents should be listened to. Parents shouldn't have to have all the answers, because that's that collaborative effort, of course.
Wonderful. And many children, this will be my last question, many children, including those with SEND, might be experiencing a little bit of worry, a bit of anxiety during, or a lot of anxiety on these transitions, whether it's moving from primary to secondary school, or even just moving from one class to another. What can parents and teachers do now, this sort of summer term, to help build children's confidence?
Yeah, my co-author Steve, he when his son was in nursery and was about to start in a reception class, the school did a really good job of, they cut out their little photos of the adults, they put them on lollipop sticks, they had a little shoebox, they sort of allowed Steve at home to role play what it would be like with his son at home to try and support that transition, to help in as concrete a way as possible. He had also visited, but in as concrete a way as possible, in a way that felt playful, that felt little and often, that felt like it was non-threatening, to be able to try and picture himself there. And of course, his face was on a lollipop stick as well, as you can imagine. So it was able to be played with. So clearly, there's the answer is different based on things like the age of the child and what the child's communication needs are and cognitive capacity is, those kind of things. But where there's that worry, anxiety, I think it's of course understanding what those worries, anxieties are, helping that reassuring that child about their strengths and any difficulties, and particular bits of support being transferred well from one to the other, so they know that they're not being left in the lurch or forgotten about or starting again totally, in terms of that understanding being transferred there from one setting to the next.
Fantastic. So lots of communication, lots of preparation, pictures, visits, And just trying to be, as, like you said, aware of our language when we're talking to children and not make it scarier than it needs to be, and putting our own anxieties, I suppose, on children. Really helpful advice. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you very much, Georgina.